our dorsal vagal response, which is where the shutdown response lies, in order to do things like feel motivated to take action and do stuff, right? That's what the sympathetic nervous system helps with. And then that dorsal vagal response also helps with digestion because it helps us relax enough to be able to digest. Not in the complete shutdown way, but we need a little bit of that dorsal vagal energy to be able to digest. We also need it to truly rest and to sleep. And so it's important to recognize that as I talk about the ventral vagal response, this isn't a hierarchy. This isn't like, oh, here's another thing I have to do. I have to figure out how to get ventral vagal all the time. No, it's just that when you need to do creative, connected tasks that come from deep within your heart, which I would suggest is when you're serving your clients, it's really essential that you do take some time to get yourself grounded. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about a little more entrepreneurial type topic. Sometimes I only talk about ADHD. And today, I'm really going to focus on the entrepreneurial aspects of being an ADHD woman entrepreneur. Certainly, ADHD will come into this. And so I'm really glad you're here. One of the things I hear is that people sometimes have a really hard time coming up with content. I hear people saying, how do you come up with content? How do you even know what to write, or how do you know what to share? And there's so much that goes into this. And I really want to unpack that today because there's one thing that I think a lot of us end up doing that actually ends up killing our content. And so let's just dig right in. So before we get to the thing that I think is killing our content, I want to talk a little bit about what quality content requires, right? I find that my highest quality content comes from me having curiosity and paying attention to people in my audience, people in the world, how I, as an ADHD entrepreneur, function in the world, and maybe sometimes struggle to function, and then what solutions I use, right? But even if you're not in your audience, in your own audience, you can focus on other people and get curious, like, oh, look at that. And let yourself be aware of both your experience of how they're showing up as well as noticing their experience. And in order to do that, we need two things. We need some sense of awareness, preferably self-awareness, so we also notice what's going on inside of us, and also curiosity. Because if we really want to understand our audience and help them feel seen and heard, and then really actually offer something that can help them, we need to speak to the problems that they're facing. So to do that, though, we've got to be willing to focus our attention on that, be curious, and have some sense of awareness to be able to do that. Another thing that is really essential for us to be able to create good content is a sense of creativity. And I'm not talking about artists. Certainly, you might be an artist and that might be your business, and that's awesome. Though I have heard artists say everyone's an artist in their own way, things like that. All children are artists till I forget how the saying goes, like forget how or something, right? Even I remember, I'll tell a story. This is an aside, but I remember working at a small school district and there was an art teacher there. And I was like, I don't want to talk to you. Like I was brand new. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to you. You're the art teacher. You might make me do art or something. I can't do art. And what he said to me was like, it was fascinating. He was like, everyone can do art. And I was like, oh no, I assured him, not me, right? I can't do art. And so he's like, grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. He goes, draw a circle on that piece of paper. And I was like, all right. And so I did. And he's like, that's art. That's art. Art doesn't have to be this big, super complex thing, right? And in this context, I mean, certainly, that didn't require a lot of creativity to draw a circle, although I grew up as a mathematician. So like my undergrad degree is in math. And so, geometry and proper circles are important. So there was some sense of thought and effort put into it, right? And so my point is by this little story is that in some way we are all artists. And certainly whatever you're creating in your business is some form of art. It might be science, but there's always some element of art or creativity to it. One of the beautiful things about having ADHD is we have highly creative brains. And some of that I think comes from having to always problem solve, like, how can I do this my way and actually be able to do it? We are what we practice. But I also think there's some brain wiring that allows us to be so creative. But sometimes this creativity gets killed. And so I want to talk about like when we lose our creative energy, when we lose our creative spirit, when we're in that place of like, I don't know what content to put out there, right? Because I've already talked about these three really important elements, which is having a sense of self-awareness, having an ability to lean in and be curious about your audience and notice things, and then having some kind of creativity. And there is one thing that can kill all of that in one fell swoop. It's stress. And I'm not talking about little stress here and little stress there, but especially chronic stress. It's that hustling that we do as entrepreneurs, especially if you're still building your business while you have a full-time gig. I might know something about that, right? Like there's a lot of hustling involved because you're like, oh, I got to get everything done for both businesses. And it can feel kind of insane and crazy. And the problem with that is that puts us into our fight or flight response, or maybe some of us into our shutdown response, right? I've talked in this podcast a few times about the autonomic nervous system and how our body responds to life-threatening danger or threats, really. And stress is a threat to our body, or actually what we're stressing about is the perceived threat, right? Because our body doesn't know the difference between a podcast deadline, a launch, an intense launch that you're going through in your business, or the first time you put your art out publicly. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between all of that and a tiger chasing you. It thinks it's the same thing because it's a very primitive system in our body. Even reptiles have it. Mammals and reptiles all have this same autonomic nervous system. What we have is the ability to notice things and build self-awareness so we can notice when we're getting into these protective responses of the fight or flight response or shutdown response. But still, automatically, we will go into our fight or flight response, especially if we are hustling and we got way too much on our plate, right? Because here's the deal. You might have heard me talk about that state where you're not in your fight or flight or you're not shut down is called ventral vagal, right? Ventral vagal response, which is really the social engagement response. It's where we feel safe enough to connect, rest, and digest. And here's the thing about that state. It's also where all systems function optimally. Think of it this way. If a tiger's chasing you, you don't need to digest the meal in your belly, be able to have a baby, fight off the flu bug, or create quality content, right, for your audience. Because if you don't get away from the tiger, then you're going to die and none of that other stuff matters. So it's like all hands on deck. Let's get away from the tiger, right? And like I said, that tiger could be all of the stuff on your plate, all of those stressors that is just skyrocketing your stress. And so if you're having a hard time creating content, one of the things I would suggest first is checking in with your system and being like, I don't know, am I dysregulated? Have I been feeling grounded, or am I feeling kind of like I'm floating through the world, not really connected? I can tell you that I have a lot on my plate right now, in addition to still having a private practice and this business, working with ADHD women entrepreneurs. I made the decision to join a coaching program to improve my coaching skills for my work with all y'all. Sound like I'm from the South. I'm from Minnesota. That's weird. Anyway, and what that's done is really tightened up my schedule. And so when it came to figuring out, like, what do I even want my podcast to be about today? I was blank. because I wasn't grounded. I wasn't feeling relaxed. And so I spent my morning. Now, yes, I have the luxury of doing this one day a week on Thursdays when I record my podcast. I slept in a little bit and I laid in bed after I had woken up and just kind of rested and snuggled with my kitties, who are now over 2, so they're not really kitties, but maybe they're always kitties. But anyway, I did that, and then I fed them first thing because I had gotten up a little later after being up late last night for tap class. Another fun thing that is in my schedule, but that is fun and an active kind of rest and social rest. But anyway, and I was like, I am not ready to figure out what to do with my podcast. So I did my morning writing and I let myself write a little longer and I connected with a couple friends and I meditated a little longer. And then through all of that, it became clear exactly what I wanted to share about, which is what to do when you don't know what to share about, right? Because in my meditation, it came to me by allowing that stillness in, by grounding myself into that social engagement system, that place of feeling safe enough to connect, rest, digest, and create, right? I was able to figure out what message needed to go out today. I will tell you, last week I recorded a podcast on dealing with the holidays as an ADHD woman. Not my best work because it came from my head and not my heart. It wasn't like terrible, I don't think. I mean, you can tell me, but it wasn't my best work because I didn't sit in the silence. I didn't ground myself. I didn't get myself into this more ventral vagal state. And to be clear, we can't be ventral vagal all the time. That's not even realistic. Like, it's just not going to happen because, first of all, stuff happens and we're going to pop out of it. But also, in order to do stuff, we need our sympathetic nervous system, which is where the fight or flight response lies. And we also need our dorsal vagal response, which is where the shutdown response lies, in order to do things like feel motivated to take action and do stuff, right? That's what the sympathetic nervous system helps with. And then that dorsal vagal response also helps with digestion because it helps us relax enough to be able to digest, not in the complete shutdown way, but we need a little bit of that dorsal vagal energy to be able to digest. We also need it to truly rest and to sleep. And so it's important to recognize that as I talk about the ventral vagal response, this isn't a hierarchy. This isn't like, oh, here's another thing I have to do. I have to figure out how to get ventral vagal all the time. No, it's just that when you need to do creative, connected tasks that come from deep within your heart, which I would suggest is when you're serving your clients, it's really essential that you do take some time to get yourself grounded. And you might be like, well, how in the hell do I do that? Right? And that's fair. I get it. Also, I want to say we come by this hustling, honestly, right? Like our ADHD, we're used to taking advantage of any moment that we have where we feel motivated. So we're like, oh my God, I'm motivated. I should do everything that's on my list right now. Anyone else? It's kind of how we roll. So we come by this honestly. But then what happens when we do that? We crash, right? And if that's working for you, by all means, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life or your business. But what I find is when I do that, I am less grounded in my content, less connected with my clients, both in my ADHD women entrepreneurs business as well as my private practice. So that then not only am I doing a disservice to me, but I'm doing a disservice to the very people I've created businesses to help, to serve. And so what we want to do is try and build awareness so that we notice like, oh, wow, I'm really dysregulated right now. And that doesn't mean like, oh, I'm dysregulated, can't make content. What you can do is find ways to get regulated. For me, I find exercise or movement of some kind, going for a walk, is really helpful because it moves that energy out, right? So you're getting that energy out, even a little bit of movement. My favorite, if you have to stay seated, is the calmness mudra, which, you're not going to be able to see this on the podcast because it's audio. But if you lift your arms up to goalposts and like jazz hands, but then you shake your hands back and forth, you can hear my bracelets maybe. I don't know what Zoom cuts out, but you shake your hands back and forth. You're supposed to do it for like 5 minutes. I can do it about 30 seconds and my hands start to feel like weird and disconnected from my body. I don't know, maybe that's what's supposed to happen. But what I find is if I do that and then kind of shake and maybe swipe the energy off my body, that can start to help. And then what I like to do after getting some kind of movement in, whether it's the calmness mudra, some exercise, or a walk, I like to sit in the silence. You can set a timer for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or longer, and just let things come to you. Maybe set an intention like what I did when I was lying in bed this morning. I was like, while I'm resting here, resting my body, may my brain sort through what people need to hear today. And it didn't come to me till after my meditation, but I put that intention in my head so that as I was going through my day, a little bit more slowly, a little bit more quietly, that what needed to be discussed today worked its way to the surface, right? So finding some way to do silence, and then I find actually writing out what comes up for you during that time. Because sometimes what comes up, there can be like different voices that come up, right? One is a part of you that is really thinking and trying to figure it out. And that's awesome. I have figuring it out parts too, and they're brilliant. And even though they help me out a lot, those parts of me that are like trying to figure things out, the problem is when I'm trying to create content, that is making things come from my thinking brain instead of from my highest self, from my soul self. So in order to create that content, if we write, we can kind of suss out the difference. It becomes very obvious. There's a lightness in your body. There's a feeling of freed, almost like a free energy, almost a little tingly in your torso even. I don't know if you experience it that way, but that's how I do when things are coming from that place. And then, you can create from there, right? The other thing I will say is when you are more ventral, you're going to be able to be curious and be like, what am I seeing? What am I seeing in myself? What am I seeing in my audience? And, I think what's hard is sometimes the main connection a lot of us have with our audience is, especially if you're just getting started, is through social media. And that sucks because social media does not, I don't want to say promote, but does not exactly help us be ventral vagal, right? All the shiny lights and the doom scrolling that happens definitely, at least I don't know about you, but I don't feel more regulated after looking at social media. So certainly, I think, if the only way to get to know your audience right now is through social media because you're building your audience, what you can do is shift your intention that you're going to actually open like Instagram or TikTok to notice what is coming up from your audience, that you are there as an observer, not a consumer. And that can actually help you stay a little bit more regulated as a way to check out what your audience wants. And what are you looking for? I'd say start looking at the problems that they're having. Because in order to create content that is really meaningful, we need to be clear on what our audience is struggling with, what's hard for them. Because then you can help them solve that problem, right? You can share ideas in your podcast and your free content, but you can also continue to grow your paid programming and refine it and make it even more valuable to the people who want to do some deeper work with you. But if you're outside of that, ventral vagal response and you have not even a sliver of it available, and you're only shut down and you're only in your fight or flight response, it's going to be very hard to take that in. And so maybe let yourself breathe. Maybe, sometimes having a cup of tea while you do it might be helpful. Maybe some calming music. Sometimes when I do that, I'll put in, well, for me, I put in like yoga music, like kirtan, but like calmer kirtan, right? I have a favorite yoga band. I guess I don't think they call themselves that, but I listen to them. And so I have a Pandora channel on them. But, if you put something in that's more soothing to kind of balance out that intensity, it can really help. All right. I feel like this one was short and sweet, and that was my intention. I don't actually keep a clock when I do this. I just talk until I feel like I've really shared something of value that can be helpful. So hopefully today you got that one of the things that might be keeping you stuck is getting stressed out by the hustling, which I know we come by the hustling, honestly. Like I said, with ADHD, we're so used to taking advantage of those moments when we have motivation to do something. We end up pushing and pushing, and sometimes we push too far and then we crash. And so, if we can find a little more balance in that, but even the bigger priority is trying to find ways to get yourself more regulated in your nervous system so that you can, be more self aware, have a greater sense of curiosity, and bolster your creativity so that the things that are coming from you to your audience are actually heartfelt and soul felt and that it matters. If you're not following yet, I would love it if you followed and shared, even if you comment. And I also want to share something else. I am preparing for a workshop at the end of December. Right now, I'm looking at Thursday, December 28th, probably at 1 o'clock Central Time, but stay tuned. I'm still sussing out the details because I want to help ADHD women figure out those underlying things that are keeping them stuck. And I'm thinking on like a 2 hour workshop so that we can really dig in and you can really walk away with some tools and steps and feeling like, okay, I've accomplished something here. And, I'll certainly share about how you can work with me more deeply if that interests you. But I don't want that to be the bulk of what we do together because I truly do want to help you in whatever way you're willing to take that from me. If we're a fit, that is. If you're like, I can't stand you, Jen, why would I want to work with you? Then, hey, I get it. But you might not be listening to this part of the podcast if that's true. So I don't know. Anyway, so stay tuned for that. If that sounds like something that interests you, where you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I would love that. I would love a 2 hour workshop later in December after what most people consider holidays, though I'm sure there's other holidays outlying. But I think, if we can get to that point and then really dig into what's keeping you stuck, what's getting in the way of you really doing what you need to do with your business. So if that interests you, go ahead and comment. I'd love that in the comment section. And that way I'll get a sense of if there's true interest in it. Okay. All right. Please follow and take care.